Croeso canis, warm welcome everyone to our session with Mohini Gupta, one of our former Charles Wallace Media Trust Fellows. We have started doing these conversations with our former fellows because we wanted to see what they're doing, what they have been up to since they stayed with us, in some cases a couple of years ago. The Charles Wallace India Trust has 4 fellowships in the UK. 3 of them are in, or rather 2 are in England and 1 is in Scotland. There is 1 which is in translation, 2 in writing, and when we set it up in 2016, we decided to make it a fellowship which would combine creative writing and translation with focus on translation. But we wanted to give an opportunity to emerging translators and writers who could come to Wales for 3 months. The fellowship is for 3 months, and spend time here working on a project that they proposed and on the basis of which they were selected. Now, Mohini is someone who surprised us. She not only spent time in Wales working on her project, but she also started learning Welsh. And this is, as you can imagine, something that has endeared her to everyone in Aberystwyth, and she became very much part of the community there. So I will now introduce Mohini, and then we will talk about what she did during the fellowship and since then. Mohini Gupta is a writer, translator, and a literary event organizer and moderator based in Delhi. She holds an MA from SOAS, University of London, and works as assistant director at the Dean's Office at the Vedika Scholars Program for Women, which is a very innovative and unique program, postgraduate program, designed to empower young women professionals. Mohini actually, in our work in India, has been very helpful in setting up sessions with European writers at the Vedika program, and that went very well on both occasions last year and earlier this year. She has written for various publications. This would be mainly articles like the Huffington Post, the Caravan magazine, the Wire, Scroll, and she has also started contributing to World Kidlit website, which is a website that encourages diversity in children's literature. So Mohini has been the India contributor, and she is preparing a new contribution or more contributions for September is the Kidlit months, World Kidlit months. Her languages are English and Hindi, and she has been working on translations from English into Hindi. This also shows that we have actually covered quite a number of languages, Indian languages. We have a fellow every year who works in a different language. So the first one was working on Bengali and English, and Mohini was the second fellow with translations into Hindi, and she also started writing Hindi poetry for children, her own poems. She has published her translations with Tulika Publishers in India and a number of journals. She also is a well-known moderator at the Jaipur Literature Festival, where she moderates sessions with Indian writers. And last but not least, she is a trained Hindustani vocalist and Western classical pianist. A multi-talented person, and during her Charles Wallace residency in 2017, she spent her 3 months in Aberystwyth, and she worked on her plant projects, which were translating Vikram Seth's Beastly Tales from Here and There, excuse me, a book of 10 fables in poetry, which she has translated into Hindi. She has also been writing, or she was writing then her own poems in Hindi, which was something of a kind of new thing for her. And very significantly, she spent time planning an initiative which she launched recently called Mother Tongue Twisters, and we will talk about that later. Mohini, over to you now.
Shumai Alexandra, Vyolkan Vaur, Bahod Viyama. Thank you so much for inviting me here. And for that very, very kind introduction. It's really wonderful to be in conversation with you, and also it's just been such a pleasure to be a part of the Literature Across Frontiers network. Like you said, it hasn't ended with the 3-month fellowship at all. It's actually our interactions and our work together, and the kind of network building has just grown since I've come back 2.5 years ago as well. And it's been such a great opportunity to meet other poets and translators from Wales, from India, writers that you bring from all over Europe. So it really has been a huge privilege for me to become a part of this network and just grow as a part of the community. So thank you again.
It's been a real pleasure, and I should say that we have been working as Literature Across Frontiers in India and with Indian writers and translators for 10 years. The fellowship is something that we started 4 years ago, and we have continued being in touch with all the fellows, and especially with Mohini, who has also come back to the UK a couple of times. So she has been very much involved in our work, connecting the UK, Wales, and also literary Europe with India. So Mohini, first of all, tell us about your focus, your key project, which was the translation of Vikram Seth's fables. Tell us why you decided to do that, and when you expect this to be published. You have completed the translations. It took quite a while to get them ready for publication, because you have to discuss them with the author, and the author is very busy. So tell us about this project, how it came about, and what kind of challenges you faced when you were working on it.
Yes, thank you. So I'll start by telling you about my engagement with this book. Like you said, Beastly Tales from Here and Then by Vikram Seth. You can see a new version of the book here. Some of my notes and post-its on that as well. But the first poem that I translated from this book is called The Frog and the Nightingale. I know you've heard me recite this before. But The Frog and the Nightingale is something I translated into Hindi when I was 15 years old, because it used to be in our school curriculum, in our English language school curriculum, and I fell in love with the poem. And for some reason, over my summer break, I decided, I love this poem so much, let me translate it into another language. And I have no idea where that instinct came from, but it did. And I really did feel like recreating the kind of, and I'll read out bits of it later for you, but he really is a master of words and wordplay and rhyme. And what he does with the language, I find absolutely fascinating. And I wondered if that could be created in another language. Of course, it was a very difficult thing to create. And what I've come up with now has been a result of my interaction with other translators, mentorship by translators like Sampurna Chatterjee, who really pushed me and helped me sort of discover different ways of navigating translation challenges. But that's where the journey began. And then, of course, I went to college. I started studying for many years, and this project sort of took a backseat for a long time. But it was something I'd been meaning to complete, but I hadn't given myself the luxury of time to do that. And when this translation fellowship showed up, I thought it would be a fantastic opportunity for me to complete the translation. But I think what happened is, because it was a combined fellowship for creative writing and translation, I started thinking up a project that I could do. And I do write poetry as well, but I'd only written in English before, because that's the language I've sort of grown up speaking, reading in, studying in, thinking in, expressing in. So I had written poetry in English before, but I'd never attempted to write in Hindi. So I realized that, and I had been working a little bit over the last few years before I applied with Tulika Books, and I'd been translating some of their children's books into Hindi. And apart from the translation work, I'd also contributed some poems to their poetry anthologies. And they do this amazing work. One of the examples of an anthology is something called Dum Dum To. I don't have it with me here, but it's an anthology of English language poems, but with particularly Indian sounds and sensibilities. And I was fascinated to be a part of that project, because I realized that while growing up, all of our favorite poems have been English poems by Western poets, so whether it's William Wordsworth or, telling us about daffodils, flowers that we have never seen in our lives or will never see in our lives. So why not have poetry that you can relate to, with content and with memories and sounds and images that we can relate to with our Indian experience. So I decided to build on that, and I said, and why in Indian English? Why not in Indian languages themselves? And I, of course, have grown up with only Hindi and English as my two main languages. But I am very interested in learning different languages, and you saw that when I was in Wales. And I didn't want to limit this project to Hindi at all, and I wanted to utilize the network of poets and translators that I'd been working with over the last few years since I'd been sort of more active in this space. So I decided to make a collaborative project, and I said that I will write original poetry in Hindi while I was at the fellowship in 3 months, and then that will be the building block towards my next project, which then I came up with just for this fellowship, and I've only gotten around to launching it now. But this was called the Mother Tongue Twisters project, and I'll talk about it later in detail. But the idea was to collect and curate Indian language poetry, specifically targeted at young readers. So I would encourage other poets and writers to write in their mother tongues, to translate into their mother tongues, which is a choice that not most of us translators make. I think most people translate from their mother tongue, if I can call it that, into English. But the direction of my translation has always been a reverse translation from English into Hindi. And I feel like that is in some way my contribution to the language, because the way I translate is a very specific way where I use very colloquial Hindi in my translations as well. And you'll hear that again when I read from my translations. But I think what happened for me at the fellowship was something a lot more than what I had planned. So this was the plan. The plan was to work on my writing and translation. But I think I went with a plan, but I sort of came back to India with a much larger purpose. And I didn't realize how much the Welsh sort of culture and literary space would resonate with what I'm trying to do and with the ideas that I had gone there with. And I think the fact that it is, first of all, a bilingual state, and it's, Aberystwyth itself has been such a hub of the Welsh national language movement over the years, that I found myself in this extremely vibrant community, which was so passionate about the language Welsh. And, through my interactions with professors, students, writers, filmmakers, just like, different kinds of people from the community, I realized what it means to the people there. And also I was staying in a house which was a Welsh-speaking house. I got really fascinated with the language, and I immediately sort of jumped into trying to learn it through different apps on my phone, but I also then started formal language classes at the University of Aberystwyth, which was an amazing experience for me. I've been trying to continue them, but it sort of, it hasn't been as regular as I had planned. But I think there were two very significant moments for me during my fellowship. One was the invitation to speak at the school, Asgol Gamraig, And it was a completely, I don't think it was planned at all. I think the school happened to have an international day coming up, and their class 6 students studied or had to dress up, and their country of focus was India. So I think they decided, why not? There's someone from India who's in Aberystwyth, so why not invite her to speak a little bit about India? So that was only, that was the only idea of the invitation. But I think it became a lot more, and my engagement there was a 2-day engagement where I went and spoke to them about India, but I also, taught them a song. There was some sort of, and it became a very meaningful engagement for me. And it's been so great that I've actually been interacting with them online every year since, on their International Day with their different year 6 students. And I think that it struck a chord with me also because it's something that I feel passionately about, is sort of the attitude towards our languages from a young age. And I realized that Welsh schools were doing that extremely well. And which brings me to my second significant moment. And this was again by chance that I happened to go along to watch a Welsh opera with Ellen. Ellen invited me to go with her. This was an opera called Wythnos yng Nghymru Fydd, which means a week in the future of Wales. And it was, I think, written in the 50s, and it was a very particularly sort of nationalist play about the language. But I think what stayed with me was the fact that it was an imagination of what the world would look like if the Welsh language was completely lost. And there was such a fear of losing the language that there's so much more motivation, amongst the Welsh government, Welsh schools, to actually engage the younger generations in speaking the language and teaching the language in a much more live and alive way. I think that's what's missing here. I think here, with 500 million speakers of Hindi all around the world, there's no, we don't have that sort of drive or fear of losing the language in any way. But I think what we are losing out on is that really meaningful engagement with, while teaching the language and reading the language amongst young children. And I felt that there was a lot that I learned from what I saw in schools in Wales. And I did attend some other sessions in other schools as well. And I started meeting people who were involved in projects like the Bart Plant Cymru, for example, which is the Young Poets Laureate in Wales, where they, where I think they announce a new poet every 2 years, and that poet has to actively engage with school students over 2 years. So it's almost like a fellowship in a way. And I realized that initiatives like that could actually work really well for Indian languages as well, because it is, while it may seem like they are not minority languages, but they are languages where a lot more encouragement is required during younger sort of ages in schools. To sort of do that. So I learned a lot, and I realized that, and I came back with that sense of thinking that why not, and I did come back and interact with a lot more younger students here as well. I've been doing sessions with schools in India. I've been working with something called the Community Library Project, where they work with first generation learners in small community libraries in Delhi and doing poetry and translation workshops for them. And I also love working with that age group, I realized. And it did do a lot for me. It sort of change the direction of the focus of my translation work. So I continue to translate and I continue to do the same work, but the purpose of that work completely changed, I think, thanks to being in Wales. So it was accidental in some ways, but I think it was meant to be. And I've never felt like that before, where I just arrived somewhere that I've meant to be. And I did come back with very deep connections with people, with, just the place as well. So yes, I think that sort of describes what the fellowship was like for me. I am really grateful for it.
Absolutely. And I think everybody in Aberystwyth remembers you very fondly. They are waiting for you to come back when it becomes possible. And you know that you are always welcome in many homes. Mohini, let's go back to your translations of Vikram's set, and maybe we could have a little break with you reading the original and your translation.
Sure. So I'll do that. I think the only thing I'll say before I read is that a lot of people find translating poetry or translating rhyme a huge challenge because, sorry, I'm just looking for the page. Yeah. Because, a lot of rhymed poetry gets translated not into rhymed poetry, but just that, the essence of the poetry is replicated, but the rhyme is usually not. But for me, the rhyme and the musicality in his poems was the feature that stood out the most, and I had to recreate that in Hindi as well. And I'd never done that before in Hindi, so it was a challenge for me, but because I enjoy working in rhyme, and I guess I am trained in music as well, so that must have played a role. But I found that having the limitation of rhyme in my translation work actually made me much freer in some sense, and it actually made me much more creative. So what I'll do is give you a sense of the first poem that I translated.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. So this one is called The Frog and the Nightingale, and I think most people in India would have read this because, like I said, it is in the school curriculum now. So I'll read just the first stanza to give you a sense of the musicality, and then maybe I could talk through some challenges and show you some examples as well. Okay, so this is Frog and the Nightingale. Once upon a time, a frog croaked away in Bingle Bog. Every night from dusk to dawn, he croaked on and on and on. Other creatures loathed his voice, but alas, they had no choice. And the crass cacophony blared out from the sumac tree, at whose foot the frog each night minstrelled on till morning light. So you could hear the way he sort of rhymes every line. So it's like an A, A, B, B, C, C, D, D kind of a rhyme scheme. And there's this there's a rhythm to his poems as well. So I'll read the Hindi version of this stanza. In Hindi, it's called Mendhak aur Bulbul. दलदल देश में मेंढक एक करता रहता टर टर टिक, सूरज के ढलकर उगने तक टर टर चलती उसकी बकबक, बाकी सब सुनना न चाहते लेकिन वे भी क्या कर पाते, मानो टूट पड़ी हो गाज सुननी पड़ी उसकी आवाज, बरगद तले बैठा वो मेंढक गाता रहता टेक सुबह तक. So this is the first stanza. And like I said, rhyming was one of the major challenges, but I really enjoyed working with that. I think one of the other biggest challenges that I faced while translating his poems was his mastery over wordplay and puns. And he employs that so much in every poem. He's coming up with new ways of, it's like challenging a translator to say, let's see how you do this one. But there's a particular stanza which was very difficult. In my first version of the translation, I had completely left it out. But it was Sampurna who read that translation back then and said, this is the part that you have to translate. So she really pushed me and helped me find ways to do it. So maybe I'll read that part out as well. So the Frog and the Nightingale have been training together. The frog has been training her and he's been working her too hard, so she's quite tired. So this comes at that part. And it says, though subdued and sleep deprived, in the night her throat revived, and the sumac tree was bowed with a breathless titled crowd. Owl of Sandwich, Duck of Kent, Mallard and Milady Trent, Martin Cardinal Mephisto, and the Coot of Monte Cristo. Ladies with tiaras glittering in the interval sat twittering, and the frog observed them glitter with a joy both sweet and bitter. So you can see he plays with bird names and British titles, which is the part that scared me too much, but I did come up with a way to translate that into Hindi. So the Hindi translation is, Bulbul ab thaki aur hari, rahi bichari neend ki mari. रात को आवाज लौट आई, महफिल फिर शानदार सजाई. सारस सम्राट कौवे महाराज छोड़ के आए सब कामकाज. हजारपुर से हंस हुजूर, मोर और मोरनी मिर्जापुर. अलीगढ़ से अबाबील अली, रौनक चारों ओर फैली. बेगम पहने मुकुट चमकते, ब्रेक में एक दूसरे से चहकते. मेंढक की भी मुस्काए होठ, पर थी उसकी खुशी में खोट. So I used different poetic devices like alliteration, some humor, instead of what he had done, with combining titles and bird names. So that wordplay was one of the toughest things that came up during the translation. I think the other thing that was really hard was, well, not hard, but I guess the fun part of it, was that he used a lot of onomatopoeia as well. And So there's a lot of sounds and a lot of humor that comes out of the sounds. And I'll read out one more portion which shows that. And this is a fable around the hare and the tortoise, which I think all of us know about. So I'll read the first stanza and then I'll read the Hindi version of this. So this is the hare and the tortoise. Once or twice upon a time, in the land of runny rhyme, lived a hare both hot and heady, and a tortoise, slow and steady. When at noon the hare awoke, she would tell herself a joke, squeal with laughter, roll about, eat her eggs and sauerkraut, then pick up the phone and babble, gibble gabble, gibble gabble. To her friends the mouse and mole and the empty-headed vole. Hey girls, did you know the rat was rejected by the bat? Good for her, the rat's a fool. Oh, I think he's kind of cool. Too bad, darling, now he's dating Lady Lemming's maid in waiting. What, that hamster? You don't say. Gibble gabble every day, gibble gabble everywhere, went the mouse and mole and hare, gibble gabble. I'll read out the Hindi version now. This is called Khargoshni or Kachua. भागम भाग था गांव कहीं, रहते थे कुछ लोग वहीं. एक खरगोशनी चिड़चिड़ सिर, एक कछुआ धीमा पर स्थिर. खरगोशनी तो हर सुबह उठकर सुनाती चुटकुला, जोर से पागल सी चिल्लाती, फिर चुपचाप अंडा ब्रेड खाती. सब दोस्तों को फोन लगाती, गपशप करती जाती. हो छुछुंदरी या हो चूहिया या फिर हो बेदिमाग मुसिया. पता है क्या उस चूहे को चमगादड़ ने कर दिया नो. बेवकूफ चूहा किया सही, यार वो इतना बुरा नहीं. उसकी अब है नई रानी, लेडी लेमिंग की नौकरानी. क्या वह मूसी है नामुमकिन, गपशप चलती रहती हर दिन, गपशप चलती हर जगह. छुछुंदर मुसिया या चूहा, गपशप लगातार. उफ ये फालतू लोग बेकार. So you can see I used gupshup, which is a word for gossip, but it also has the onomatopoeic sort of effect that which he was sort of attempting with gibble gabble. The other thing that I do in the translation, which you might have picked up, is that I've used some English words there as well, like phone or no, or some words that I felt were more colloquial, and that's something I try to do in my translation, is keep it to a very relatable kind of a language for young readers, because I want it to be seamless and interactive for them, and I don't want them to be put off by words that may be too sort of Sanskritic or too obsolete for them to enjoy in a poem like this especially. So that's something else that I try to do, and I try to keep in mind. I think the other thing that Vikram Seth does a lot is he uses a lot of nonsense verse, and he comes up with different names for places. Like he uses runny rhyme in this one. And in another one, he says BBC as Beastly Broadcast Company. And that one was a very tough one to translate, because there's BBC and there's the pun on it, which is Beastly Broadcast Company. So I had to decide whether I'm using, it was a very tough decision, but I did choose to use the Indian national channel to sort of have a pun on that and use that. So, and I think, and I talk about this a lot, but I think I wouldn't have done this if I was translating from Hindi to English. I don't think I would have translated cultural references. I think it would have almost been like a post-colonial reaction where I would have said, this is a Hindi word, you find out what it means. But because this was an Indian writer writing in English, I think I took the liberty of converting his Western references like Mozart or BBC, and I converted them into Hindi, into Indian references, which would work well in Hindi. So I thought of who the pinnacle of music would be in India, and I used his name instead of Mozart. I thought of the Indian equivalent of BBC, and I used that instead of... So I think those were some of the decisions that I took the liberty of taking while translating as well. I think that comes after. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, this is at the core of translation. You're constantly negotiating between the two languages. You're finding solutions, and of course I would like to say that you had a very good mentor in Sampurna Chatterjee. We have to mention her here with her full name, and as someone who not only writes for children but also translates, and has translated poetry for children, which exactly uses wordplay, but into English.
Exactly. Yeah. And she's done one of the most difficult Bengali nonsense verse books ever. The Abol Tabol in Bangla. So it was just, again, something that was meant to happen, where I just happened to bump into her, and then we've become so close over the years. But her mentorship has really transformed the translation into something that I feel very happy about. And I hope, like you said, it's been very difficult to work and to get a response from the author, because he is very busy and he is writing his new novel at the moment as well. But I hope that it sees the light of day at some point this year or early next year. So I will keep you posted on that.
Yeah, we're all looking forward to it. Let's now talk about Mother Tongue Twisters and that whole initiative that you were thinking about, that was kind of gestating, while you were here, and then during the time after you returned to India. We want to leave some time for questions later, so we'll have to draw this to a close quite soon. But tell us about what you have done with this, how it's been running, because you have been organizing these Thursday Translation Thursday talks with translators, not only from India but from other countries as well.
Yeah, so like you said, I had actually come up with the idea of the project specifically for this fellowship, and it was where the idea sort of started growing and developing. When I came back, it's something that I had meant to launch much earlier, but because of all the other things that I got involved in, I could never find time to devote to sort of building this in a way that I could put it out there for the world. I had although started collecting material for it as soon as I came back, which is why when I launched 2.5 months ago, I had enough material to put out to start the page as well. So, and this material came from, again, really good poets and translators who actually created original poetry for the platform. So that was the point of this platform, was to push people to create poems in their languages or even in English, but with memories that would resonate with, I can't say there's one Indian experience, because there really isn't, and it's so diverse across the country, but at least things that would be familiar to readers or speakers in those languages. Like I said, when I came back, I also started focusing much more on my work with younger readers and my workshops with young people. I also came to Wales, thanks to you, last year, and did more workshops in schools. And I think all of that changed my focus, and I realized that this is the space that I wanted to work on, wanted to sort of devote myself towards. And even in terms of my academic work, I've always been interested in language politics and translation, not just the practice of translation, but also studying the different sort of social linguistic dynamics between English and Indian languages. So this also gave a direction to that focus, and it's actually turned into a research project that I'm working on and will hopefully convert into a PhD project this year as well. But Mother Tongue Twisters came out of all of that. It's sort of the base with which I want to start this work, where I curate and collect poetry in Indian languages, and I'm also adding audio and video to these poems, so that and it's going to turn into a website very soon at some point, but it is something which will allow people who don't speak the language to also arrive on the website and take in some sort of inspiration or just enjoy sounds from different languages as well. So like I said, I did sort of the experience in Wales was what gave me was what made this goal much more stronger. And Translation Thursdays, like you said, they've been going on for 10 weeks now, and I plan to continue them for the next 5 as well. And it's something that I just wanted to use the platform to spread awareness about the process of translation, because translation will be core to this platform as well, because it will be about translating from English into Indian languages, or one Indian language to another Indian language. And I just wanted to give people out there just a chance to understand what translation is about. And I think the most encouraging thing for me is that I just started this as small, like a small group to discuss translation, but it's turned into sessions where hundreds of people are now registering for each session. The views on the session on Facebook has over thousands of views. So I've been very overwhelmed by the response I've gotten. It just shows that the work that we are doing is, it really does resonate with people. And there are people out there who are actually interested in hearing about translation or listening to translations. And I think that's extremely encouraging for me. And it's sort of given me the impetus to do that much more and focus that much more on this project. The good thing is that I'm also seeing other things come up. Like I saw recently there's a new Translation Tuesday series that has begun as well. So I'm glad that it's sort of, building a community and sort of, becoming like a little sort of domino effect on other sessions that are also, I mean, I'm not taking credit for anything, but I think it's just important to have as many initiatives out there on translation. I'm really glad that this is contributing to that space as well.
Absolutely, but what you have done is you were the first to start this, and you have really you have gained a kind of momentum which must be, it can't be easy to sustain. And so you have been going every week. You have a session with a very interesting speaker, more and more people attending, and of course you can watch the sessions, including the Q&A. If you don't manage to watch it live, you can watch it later. So
we're all on the Facebook page, Mother Tongue Twisters,
yeah,
on our Instagram page, on Twitter, MTT and more. So I'm going to put a little plug in here for anybody who wants to follow the project and see the kind of work that we're doing.
Wonderful. But I think you also creating a community, as you said. You're creating a kind of informal network of translators who some of them may know each other, but some may not. And you're also now bringing on board translators from Europe and from other parts of the world. So it's really a wonderful initiative. Congratulations, Mohini. It's great. Very proud of you. We're very proud
You've
of
been very encouraging as well, which means a lot to me. So thank you for always taking such an active interest in all the work that all of your fellows do. And I don't know how you do it, but you manage to make everyone feel like you're as involved in their lives and their projects. So that really means a lot.
Thank you. So I think we'll stop here, and so that we have more time for the Q&A, and I'm sure there will be some interesting questions for you to answer. So welcome to the second part of this session. As you can see, we have done something that may be not immediately noticeable, but we actually pre-recorded the first part. We pre-recorded the conversation, and that was partly because I was worried that we may have some problems with the notorious internet, and as you could see, there was a little bit of freezing at one point, which made me freeze, but then it went back to normal, so everything was okay. But we thought if we pre-record, it will be better. So now we're going actually live, and I would like to welcome Professor Ellen Half-Griffith-Jones, who some of you know already from Mohini's session 2 weeks ago. Ellen is someone who has also missed Mohini a lot, and so I thought that it would be great for both of us to be here and co-moderate the Q&A. So because this is done as a webinar, you will have to ask your questions by typing them into the chat. So please do that. We already have quite a number of questions that we've received, and we even received some prior to the session. This Q&A will run for about 30 minutes. I will start actually with a question I have been wanting to ask Mohini, and that is, what was Vikram Seth's reaction to the translations? We spoke about how busy he was, and it took a while before he could actually respond. What was his response?
Thanks so much, Alexandra, and it's really good to be here with you and Ellen and see so many friends online on this webinar. So thank you so much, all of you, for being here, for listening in. It's really encouraging for me to see you here. And Alexandra, to your question, yes, we did talk about how busy he is, but fortunately, many years ago, when I had sent him my absolutely first translation, which I read out in the session, The Frog and the Nightingale, I was only 15, and he was very kind enough to respond. And I kept the first letter that he marked up this copy of the print translation that I'd sent him, and he wrote a little note at the end which said, "Dear Mohini, a wonderful sense of fun and great imagination. Thanks, Vikram." But the important part comes next, where he says, "Just a few comments, please don't mind them." And I thought that was very kind. But after this, he also read out the translation at the launch of a new version of the book, which I held out for you, The Beastly Tales, when it was re-illustrated at a spring festival in 2012. I think he read out the translation, and he later came up and told me, I think the audience enjoyed the Hindi version more than the English. So I've been holding on to that. I've been holding on to that comment since then. But Ellen has another version of the book with her as well. But yeah, so he's been very kind. But I think the entire translation hasn't been reviewed by him yet. So I'm hoping that it can happen soon and it can turn into a book. But otherwise, I'm very happy to keep sharing poetry like this on platforms such as this one.
Thank you. It must be exciting working on poems by Vikram Seth, and I'm sure you will continue working with him. Now we will start reading the questions that you have sent us, and in some cases, because there may be questions around the same topic, we will try to kind of bring them together into a compound question. Essentially, they fall into 2 or 3 categories. One category would be about the craft of translation or the art of translation, and the other category is about language politics or the politics of translation. And also we had some questions about access to technology because of the platform that you're creating. But let's start with the first question. The very first question came from Anamika, and it's a 2-part question. What is more important in translating for children? The actual message in the poem, or the words that the poet might have emphasized? And the second question she sent goes like this: given current political scenario worldwide, would you focus more on poetry that empowers and raises awareness within children as regards civic duties and responsibilities?
Thanks, Anamika. Very important questions. I'll go with the first one first, which is around what is the bigger focus while translating? Is it the message in the poem or the words, right? So I have to say that I give them absolutely equal importance. And I think when I spoke about the fact that a lot of rhymed poetry gets translated, but is not usually converted into rhymed translations, I think for me, the words that are used in the poem are as important as the message. I don't like to think about it as a message, but just the content of the poems. So for example, one of the poems in Beastly Tales is called Elephant and the Trapper Pan. And the message, if you can say that, is actually of, protection of wildlife. So it is a lot about biodiversity. He covers a lot of animals. There's a lot of, again, humor and fun incidents and all of that. But ultimately, it's a very, very powerful message at the end. So, but I think the way he does it is important. And I think that is what has the effect on the reader. And I think that's very important to create through different poetic devices in the translation as well. So for me, it would be of equal focus, both the message and the words that are used, especially if it's things like rhyme, alliteration, puns, things like that. About the second part of the question about politically empowering the youth through poetry and through translated works, I think that is a very important thing to do. I can't claim to have done it myself yet, but I do think it's important. And I was recently listening into a webinar by translators Lawrence Schimmel and Daniel Hahn. I know Lawrence is here today. And they talk a lot about how important it is that the literature of the youth engages with political movements that are going on in the world today. And I think everybody has access to it because of social media, because of technology. So I think there's no way of leaving those out. And I think in my translations, and you'll see them if you come across some of the finer details, but I have put in very subtle messages and subtle references to political movements as well, but without affecting the flow. But I think it is important to do that. I think there's no point keeping it protected from what's happening outside. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Another question we received, actually a two-part question again, from Sango Bidani, that came before the session as well and was also typed here, asks about the digital and digital humanities. Could that prove to be a tool, a useful tool in preserving and archiving regional literatures? And the second question is about the need for institutions like the Sahitya Academy to promote translation of regional literatures. And do you think that there might be some dangers of being co-opted into the canon if the translation is exclusively into English?
Excellent.
Both very interesting questions.
Yes, and very important ones. Thanks, Sango. So about digital humanities, I'm actually very new to this space, but since I've been doing some research and since I've been working on this project, I've come across a lot more projects like this, which are doing wonderful work in this space. And I think it is a great tool to preserve and archive regional language literatures. Although I'm very conscious of the access, like Alexandra mentioned, to technology. And I think if we want to take it to different areas and different groups of people, I think that there's a limitation when it comes to technology and when it comes to an online resource base. But what I would like to do ideally with Mother Tongue Twisters and a project like this is, of course, the preservation and archiving happens online. But what I would really like to do is take it to schools and libraries and spaces where young people come together, and whether they do or do not have access to technology, I would like to take that material to them. So I think it has to be a combination of the online resources and offline engagement as well. I think that's the only way it can really spread. But I think it's a great start, and I do know that a lot of great collectives are doing this work already, and whether it's Sahapedia or Dark or a lot of other collectives that are doing work like this, which is quite important. About your second question about needing more institutions, I think it's always good to have more institutions that promote translations of regional literatures. This is a double-edged sword about the danger of being co-opted, because in one way, the only way for them to be discovered is if they are translated into English and reach a wider audience. But I think the other thing that we can do, and I feel like is not being done enough, is translation between Indian languages as well. English has sort of become the bridge to translations from any one Indian language to another. And I think if we can have more grants or fellowships or incentives that promote multilingual people or translators to actually do this between the different Indian languages that they speak, I think that would be a really great initiative for institutions like that to promote as well.
Maybe we could add to this a question. I'm scrolling to see if I can get back to it, because we have quite a few questions, but there was a question about access to technology. Which is again a very important question. Access to technology is not a blanket issue. It's something that some classes have and others don't. So technology has become extremely important now in this situation. when we are all in lockdown or coming out of it, and it has become really an important tool for us to simply communicate. So what
this is a question. Yeah, this is a question from Stuti Govil. Great passion project, Mohini. I met Stuti in Jaipur about 2 years ago. Do you plan on integrating poetry and stories from different classes? And do you think that the stories that we curate and source are impacted by differential class-based access to technology and resource sharing? So quite a broad question there.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Ellen, and thanks, Stuti. I have told all my friends to not ask me difficult questions, but they have. But I'm really glad that Stuti has asked this question, because I think it's something that I will need to be conscious of as I move forward in this project. And I think my first point of contact is the people that I have access to, and I've sort of pushed people who I know to sort of contribute to this initiative. But I think, like I said, it'll have to be a combination of what I do in this project and also taking it to different platforms and different physical spaces where I engage with different people, because I think otherwise there is a danger of not being inclusive in that sense. And I think I'm very conscious of that, and I would like to do that as much as possible, especially because it's a project that is limited by technology and access. So I think that's an important thing to think about.
Perhaps I could just bring in a few questions here as well from the various fora that we have for questions. There are quite a number of people who want to know what kind of reception these translations have had so far, especially on the part of people who are not familiar with the English, who don't understand the English. And also perhaps you might want to say a few extra things about the kind of use that you've made of what you might call Hinglish in these translations too. So what's the reception so far?
I'll answer the Hinglish question first because it's easier to answer, but I have used Hinglish a lot in my translation, and that's a very deliberate decision, because I realized that it has to be in a language that the young people who speak Hindi today would relate to, and it's a language that they would speak. So while I've tried to limit it as much as possible, but for example, a word like being bored, if you say it in Hindi as "oob jana," it's not a word that you use very regularly or very colloquially. So I've kept that word as bore hona, which is the verb for being bored. So that's just a small example, but I have kept some of these sort of code switched sort of sentences and verses in the Hindi translation, because I feel like when the reader reads it in Hindi, it has to be a Hindi that they can relate to. So that's been very, very useful for me. Sorry, what was the other question?
I think there was also a question about responses from Hindi speakers.
All right, so about the translation, it hasn't actually been published. I can only talk about the reception that I've had when I've performed this poem, and that's always been very, very positive. I can talk a little bit about my work with Tulika Books, where I've translated some of their children's stories into Hindi. And I never knew where the books were going, because I would send them the translation and that was it. But it was only recently when I started working with the Community Library Project in New Delhi, which is run by Michael Creighton and Mridula Koshi. They run this amazing project where they have these small community libraries in different areas in Delhi and Gurgaon. And they work with first generation learners to talk about different things about literature, poetry, and they bring in people to do workshops. So I did a poetry workshop there once, and I realized that some of their read aloud sessions had been reading out the Hindi translations of the books that I translated, which was a very satisfying thing to know, because I didn't know what would happen once I would translate these works, but to know that there are people who are really gaining and sort of enjoying the language that I'm using and the translation that I've done, that's always a really a really meaningful thing to know.
Yes, quite a few questions. Ellen, can you help me here?
Yeah, sure. there's a question about publishing in India. This is a question by Ruth Kemp. Can you tell us a bit about children's publishing in India? Do most publishers publish the same book in various languages? Is there more translation from English into Indian languages, or more from Indian languages into English? So about translation flows as well, isn't it? Which is quite important.
Thanks a lot, and hi, Ruth. So, since I'm talking about Tulika books, they actually do this amazing thing where when they have a story, they publish it at the same time in English and 8 Indian languages. So they've been doing that very consistently for years now, and I think, and they also attempt to try to translate into other languages at the same time as they go along, but they make it a point to do English plus 8 Indian languages at the same time, so it's available in different states for all the children at the same time. There are other publishers who are doing this, and I would say that there are more, I have to say there's more material in English as far as I know. The book that I was talking about, I do have it with me now, the book called Dum Dum Tho, Rhymes and Rhythms, which was, I thought that was a really interesting attempt at using sort of Indian language-based English, where it was, where, like I said, it uses Indian sounds and memories and sensibilities, but in an English that would be accessible to everyone. So I think there are experimental things like that are going on as well, which have a great reception. But I think we still have some way to go when it comes to translating from English into Indian languages for children.
And perhaps when we think of sort of translating between Indian languages as well, and forfeiting English too in that process, because of course there is a level of mutual comprehension between some Indian languages, at least. Do you have any experience of that yourself, Mohini, that you'd like to share?
Translating between Indian languages? Unfortunately, I'm only fluent in Hindi and English, so I've been translating between those two languages. I have learned Urdu, but I haven't attempted a translation yet. So I don't have an experience, but I know that it's a conversation I keep having with some people who are in the translation community here, especially Arshia Sattar, who's encouraging this work as a part of her Yali project at the Sangam House, where they took a book. I think one of the first books that they worked with was Ghachar Gochar, a Kannada novel, which did really well, and it was translated. It's a novel by Vivek Shanbhag, translated by Srinath Perur into English. And what they did was they tried to get other translators involved in this, in translating this book, but not through the English translation. So they actually had grants and they actually had workshops where other translators were working with the Kannada writer to translate this into other languages. So there is some work going on in small pockets, but I think that's something that needs a lot more attention. And I think there's a lot more ability to do this in the country. And I think that's a very underutilized skill or underutilized area in translation. Thanks, Shashi, for that question.
Shall we go to a question here? This is from Priyali Ghosh. Thank you so much, Mohini. It's fascinating to hear about your work in Wales and also in Delhi. I was wondering, how do you feel emotional resonance change when poetry moves from English to Hindi? Or maybe they don't. And there's also a question about publish or translating for children. This is from an anonymous attendee. Related to Anamika's question, doesn't rhyme become the principal factor in children's poetry translation?
Thanks. Well, I'll address Priyali's question first. And that's a really good question. Thanks, Priyali. I talk about this when I talk about my translation because there was, and I'll give you an example of a particular stanza that gave me trouble when it came to emotional resonances. Because this stanza was, I'm going to give a spoiler about this poem now, but the nightingale dies at the end of the poem. And so the part that describes this is very matter of fact in English. And it says, trembling, terrified to fail, blind with tears, the nightingale heard him out in silence, tried, puffed up, burst a vein and died. So it's very quick and it's very matter of fact. And when I was thinking of how to translate this into Hindi, if there are Hindi speakers here, I didn't want to use the verb Marjana, because I just didn't think it had the sort of pathos of the scene that was being described in the English, but it was done in such a sort of very sort of straightforward way. I didn't know how to do that in Hindi. So the way I translated this into Hindi was चुपचाप सुना पर सह ना पाई, निराशा से आंखें भर आई, अंतिम बार लगाया जोर, टूटी उसकी सांस की डोर. So if you see टूटी उसकी सांस की डोर, there's nothing like that in the English version at all. I've used like an image and a metaphor that doesn't even exist in the English version, but I felt that the pathos of the scene needed that. And you're right that there were a lot of differences in how I had to deal with these emotional kind of resonances, like you call them, between the two languages, because very different ways of dealing with it in both languages.
There's a question related to this, and it goes roughly like this. You have taken some liberties, and you have in translating these poetry fables, and what would you have done if Vikram Seth did not agree with your solutions?
Oh God, I was actually ready for that, and I'm still ready for that, because I think he has a very, very keen sense of sound and meter and rhyme. And the poems that he hasn't seen yet, I'm sure he will have a lot to say about. But I think I'm not at all rigid about the translation that I've done. Although I have to say about the Frog and the Nightingale, if there are changes suggested now, that's become very close to my heart, because I've read it so many times and I've worked with it so much. So if there are changes in that poem, I'll be very heartbroken. But I'm trying to not be emotionally attached to the other ones, because I think I will have to give him, he will have the last word. And I will push back wherever I can, but he will have the last word on how he believes the Hindi version should be. And I know that his Hindi is very strong as well. He himself has done a lot of translations from Hindi to English of poets like Nirala and other poets. And I know that he, I would sort of completely, agree with or listen to what he has to say and take his feedback positively. Oh, the question is also about particular cultural references and how he reacted to it. So I have his first reaction to the poem that I sent him, and he's put 2 ticks on the part where I converted Mozart into Tansen. There are 2 ticks, so I assume that he has approved it and he's okay with some of these changes that I've made.
There's a lot of praise which everybody can see as well, and there's quite a long comment from Shashi from the University of Alberta in Canada. Hello, Shashi. Thanks for joining us. And there's a lot of praise for Mohini. Basically, it says, I've been working in the field of translation studies and publishing for over 15 years. And I've never seen anyone like Mohini. And so Shashi would like to know more about, in due course, what the response to the translations will be, and the reception, and also have you tried translating from one Indian language to another? I think you have responded to that as well. And I would recommend that anybody who's interested in the project and in Mohini's work joins Mother Tongue Twisters. It's a discussion forum, and there are the weekly conversations with translators as well. So unless we have skipped a really important question, I think we will have to draw the session to an end here. And I would like to say that we will have another session with one of our former Charles Wallace India Trust Fellows, Maz bin Bilal, next Tuesday at the same time. Maz is a translator from Urdu, but also from Persian. He's a poet in his own right, and he's now writing short stories. And he teaches at the Jindal Global University near Delhi in Sonipat. So this will be the session entitled Locked Down in Sonipat. And I hope you will join us for that. I would like to thank you very much, Mohini. If there are any questions that you will want to respond to, we can do that in writing. And thank you, Ellen, for helping me field the questions. And thanks to Yr Egin Center for hosting this. And I think that's it. Thank you.
We went to Yr Egin in September, didn't we, Ellen? Yes.
Yeah, that's true. That's where we were in September when you were with us last. So this time it's a virtual Egin. Not as pleasurable necessarily as being together in the same place, but we're very fortunate in that we're able to connect through technology. And as we know, digital deprivation is a big, big issue in many parts of the world. We're fortunate to be able to connect now. And it's been great to have you with us once again, Mohini. You know, you made such an impact when you were here in Wales at the beginning, almost 3 years ago now. And it's great to see your impact continuing. And I hope that your translations into Hindi of this book and the challenges that you've had to face in flexing Hindi to reach a version of this highly, highly challenging translation. I think that perhaps some of the Welsh language poets might want to take it on as well. And let's see what kind of versions we'd get through that. And I know that you'd be able to assist in that process too, and to share the decisions that you had to make with them. So maybe we'll see that. Who knows?
I'll get to a point of translating into Welsh one day. It's very far away, but no, thank you so much, Ellen and Alexandra. I really had a great time, and this was a great opportunity. Thank you so much, both of you.
Okay, thank you all. Thank you, Mohini. Thank you, Ellen.
Bye. Hwyl. Diolch.